Christine E. Schulze here, your favorite Elvish author, and welcome back to another chapter reaction, where I read the first chapters of books to you guys to see if I can help you discover something new you might want to read, and often to see if I can find something new that I might want to read for myself as well. But today I am going to be reading to you from one of the books that I have actually written and published called The Crystal Rings. The Crystal Rings is one of my young adult fantasy books. It tells the story of 4 princesses. Actually, it contains 3 stories about 4 different princesses who go on different adventures, and they're all bound together by these magical crystal rings. And the more of the book that you read, the more that you come to learn how their different stories are intertwined by these magical crystal rings. So we're just going to jump in, and we're going to read a selection from the first of the 3 stories, and that is called Time Dancers. And let me show you real quick where we're going to be at on our map. The island of Spanino, which has 4 different kingdoms. And as you can see, there's a little bit more of a diverse cast. Even when I was a little kid, I just happened to notice that at that time, and even nowadays, although it does seem to be improving, but especially back then, I just noticed that as far as I could see, there wasn't as much diversity in fantasy, and that was my favorite genre, and I just really wanted to see more diverse characters. So that's when I started making up my own races to kind of represent different looks and different races. Again, diversity is super important to me. I've started having a couple of young adult books where I start to include a couple of characters who have special needs. I work with folks in my day job who have special needs, and so that's something that's inspired me within the past couple of years. I do also have a few kids books, which we are going to read eventually on my channel, and those majority of those are all inspired by people I've worked with and are all focused on special needs characters who just happen to go on adventures like anybody else. But yeah, on that note, we are finally going to jump in, so strap on your elf ears and get ready to listen to a selection from Time Dancers from The Crystal Rings. Time Dancers. Calina smiled as the first bright rays of dawn slipped through the window and brushed against her cheeks. Today, she turned 18. And today was the day, by custom of her people, the Spaninos, that she would meet her betrothed for the first time. 18 was the coming of age for Spaninos. As Princess of Mariposa, one of the 4 Spanino kingdoms on the Spanino Isle, Calina was naturally engaged to royalty, in this case, King Lopez of Caliente. Calina's smile grew a little. A king, not just a prince, but a king just like her father Jorge, and a king father talked very highly of at that. She hoped he would like her. She hoped he would possess an amiable, gentle, patient personality, though she felt sure her father would not choose anyone but the finest Emilian gentleman for her to wed. She hoped also that he was intelligent and wielded a sense of humor. And, though not the most important aspect, she admitted with an extra smile that she hoped he was handsome. Opening her eyes, she sat up, blinking in the bright sunlight and drinking in the warm purples, crimsons, yellows, and greens of her room. Then she slipped from the satin covers of her canopy bed, bare feet touching the soft tapestry. Gliding to the wardrobe, she sifted through to find her best clothes. She wanted to look perfect when meeting her soon-to-be husband. She donned the white sleeveless dress, its long straight silk brushing the floor. A slit was cut high up to her knee, revealing just enough of her soft brown skin to allure without looking too immodest. Her feet remained bare, as was customary to her people. She called for her 2 handmaids who helped wrap white satin ribbons around her arms in the familiar crisscross fashion. Each ribbon her people wore carried a different meaning. White ribbons meant purity. White diamond flowers also adorned her dark brown hair. Her handmaids wove her cascade of tight ringlets into intricate braids, and Calina studied the artful masterpiece in her mirror with clear approval. Once certain her hair and attire were perfect, she dismissed her handmaids and stepped outside her room to wait for Fernando. Fernando, a servant about her age, arrived promptly to escort her to her father's study, explaining that her father would arrive soon with King Lopez. Calina took his arm, tingling all over with excitement, hardly able to conceal her anticipation. In fact, as they started down the hall, she half pulled poor Fernando along. She hoped he would forgive her and understand why such enthusiasm gripped her. After all, meeting her betrothed for the first time was a once-in-a-lifetime event. As Fernando led her, or rather, as Calina dragged him into the spacious sitting room, Calina found the room brightly illuminated with the sunlight gracing the high arched windows, dancing along the satin chairs, bookshelves, tapestries, and maps. But where are they? She sighed, releasing Fernando from her grasp and glancing with disapproval at the empty chairs. Don't worry, my lady. They'll be in shortly. Your father told me we would probably arrive first. He went down to greet King Lopez personally, seeing as they're old friends. Calina paced impatiently. Finally, she headed over to the window and peered down into the courtyard. No carriages in sight. Her husband-to-be must be inside the castle already. Her heart raced. He would walk in at any moment. Calina, my love! A wide smile beamed across her face at her father's voice, and she whirled about. Her smile vanished, and the great joy shining in her eyes extinguished like a snuffed candle flame. Her father and the man standing in the doorway beside him walked toward her, and her father said, Daughter, this is King Lopez, my dear friend and your fiancé. Lopez, my daughter, Calina. Calina could only stare. She did not see the gentle, sparkling eyes, or the kind smile, nor even his handsome face. She glanced on these features, but would not let herself drink them in. They were overshadowed by the traces of wrinkles on his tanned skin, and the glimpses of gray sprinkled in his black hair. She quickly tried to conceal her look of disappointment, but a glimmer of sadness shone in Lopez's eyes, and she knew he had seen all too well. Even so, Lopez took her hand, kissed it, and said in a deep yet gently quiet voice, An honor to meet you, Miss Calina. Your father has told me much about you, and I have been looking forward to this day for a long time. Yes, a pleasure to meet you, I'm sure, Calina replied, her voice lacking the warmth she would have wished to give this stranger. She couldn't help feeling cold toward him, but she wished she did not feel so cold. After all, he too was a victim of this arrangement long ago decided by rigid traditions, and by those who could not possibly know his heart's desire any better than they could know hers. An awkward silence passed in which Calina's gaze strayed from Lopez to rest on the floor. She dared not look at her father and reveal her anger. Well then, her father said at last in his ever-cheerful tone, shall we be off to breakfast? Yes, that would be lovely, Lopez said. Miss Calina, may I escort you? Yes, you may, she said stiffly. Upon catching her father's surprised, warning glance, she added, I would be honored. She took Lopez's arm, and King Jorge led the way down tapestry-lined corridors. Their vividly colored dragons and other creatures leered at Calina as if mocking, and she scowled at them in passing. Jorge led them inside the private dining room. Within, more of the high arched windows allowed the white sunlight to shimmer on the long, silk-laden table. Calina no longer cared for the sunshine, or how it illuminated the rich purples, reds, and oranges adorning the room. Somehow, the colors of the silks were too bright now. They sat at the table, her father at the head, Calina and Lopez close by on either side, and Lopez said, This is a lovely kingdom you have here, Jorge. Thank you. A lovely daughter as well. And which is more lovely, kingdom or daughter? Jorge asked playfully. Lopez smiled at Calina and said quietly, You, my lady, of course, are most lovely. Calina tried to smile for his sake, but could only muster a curt nod in reply. Her father sent another of his warning glares her way, and as she caught it from the corner of her eye, she quickly glanced away, down at her plate. She didn't wish to be so rude toward Lopez, but her father's constant pressure and disapproval didn't allow her to step back, calm down, and recover from the blow already dealt her by seeing how old Lopez was. Her father knew how important having someone her age had always been to her, and he'd always promised to uphold that wish. She couldn't handle the mingled betrayal and disappointment. It was too much thrown at her at once, especially when she was still expected to act so proper. She glanced at her father again, hopefully, and then looked down again. By the look on her father's face, he wouldn't give her the much-needed time to recover. Much as she tried to contain her emotions, she felt like a tethered animal in need of a good run and roar before being subdued back into its cage. Without that, she might bite without warning. She heard her father take a deep breath. He always did this when trying to keep from exploding in front of guests. Passions made his temper flare just as fiercely as his daughter's, and then say, So, Calina, perhaps later you and Lopez can go down to the art room. I told him that you love art, especially the crystal works from the Aishan Kingdom. Lopez himself is a fan of Aishan crystal, aren't you, Lopez? Yes, actually, I am. He again smiled at Calina, warmly prompting her. She returned only a very feeble smirk before casting her father such a glare of disapproval as she'd never cast him before, a glare that he returned with one of his own. Breakfast arrived, and Calina felt grateful to have more than just an empty plate to distract her. She took as long as possible to eat, leaving the two men to do most of the talking. They caught up on their friendship with talks of old times and what they'd accomplished in the time they'd been parted. A part of Calina told her to listen, to try to get to know Lopez and find some common ground with him, but she refused. Her anger over her father's betrayal trumped everything, and then hopelessness reminded her that she could have nothing in common with this king, who looked 15 years her senior at least. When they all finished eating, Jorge again brought up the matter of visiting the art room. Calina agreed, if only to appease him, and if only to have more time to plan the ranting she would unleash later on her father. Inside the art room, Calina spoke little, and when she did, it was in short, curt replies. A few times, she cast her father looks of mingled anger and desperation, but his gaze would warn her each time. She must get through the day. She must attempt to be courteous. Lopez was their guest, her future husband at that, and she was making a horrible impression. Evening came, and they took a walk in the garden. Calina had just returned from a much-needed break to the bathroom when she heard her father and Lopez talking to each other. Slowing her walk, she stopped behind a tree, peered out, and listened. "Jorge, you don't need to apologize." "Yes, I do," the king thundered in his all-too-familiar, exasperated tone. "She's been nothing but rude and spiteful, an absolute brat, all day. I can't understand what's gotten into her." "I told you it wouldn't work. I told you she'd be upset," Lopez said mournfully. For a moment, a twinge of guilt tweaked at Calina's heart. "You should have spoken to her before, so it wouldn't be such a disappointment. It's a big difference. I'm 36. You should have told her." Guilt and pity for Lopez fleeted at these words, drowned again by fury at her father's foolishness. 36! Twice as old as her! What was her father thinking? "Perhaps now would be a good time for me to present my gift," Lopez continued. "Perhaps it would help lighten her mood." "The way she's been acting? No, she doesn't deserve it." "Jorge, if she's to be my wife, I must win patience with her. I must do what I can to try to win her favor, if not her love. What good will it do to be angry at her in return? Please, let me present it to her when she returns. You did have Fernando take it up to her room?" Jorge released another deep sigh. "Yes." Calina stepped back into the clearing, and her father said in a strange, cheerful voice, "Ah, Calina dear, back already. We were just talking. Lopez has something he'd like to give you." "It's in your room." Lopez smiled at her hopefully. "Shall we?" Calina took his offered arm. The trip up to her room proved a silent procession. She suddenly realized how tired she was, and while her anger held tight, some of it began to melt away into a bitter sadness. She needed to cry, to release, to let go, and to see this wretched day come to a close. As they reached her room and opened the door, Calina noticed the moonlight falling through the window upon a large, vertical object standing at the foot of her bed. It was concealed by a white glimmering cloth. "I hope you like it," Lopez said as they walked over. "Are you ready?" Calina nodded. Even through the myriad of negative emotions, she couldn't help feeling a little curious. Then, as Lopez pulled the cloth aside, she took in her breath. It was the most gorgeous mirror she had ever seen, framed by an ornately carved gold frame perched on elegant carved feet. Yet the mirror itself dazzled most. Calina knew at once it was made of crystal from the Aishan Mountains, as the moonlight dancing upon its surface reflected small prisms on her wall. Calina gazed at her reflection in awe and wonder. But, as she noticed Lopez's reflection behind hers, the tiredness crashed down on her like a weight, and with it the reminder of the sadness that allowed this mirror to stand before her. "Thank you. It's lovely," she said quietly, managing a weary smile. "Now, if you please, I am tired." "Oh, of course," Lopez said. His reflection behind her looked downcast. Perhaps he also was too tired now to hide how he truly felt. They studied each other in the mirror that way a few moments, and then their gazes fell. Lopez bid Calina good night and promptly left. Her father followed him out, though not without a piercing glare at his daughter that promised he would be back to discuss things with her. As the door closed, Calina took a deep breath and sank down on the edge of her bed. She wanted to throw herself down, scream into the pillows, release a great rush of tears, and wear herself out until she fell asleep, but she had to hang on just a little bit longer. Pride ran through hers and her father's veins just as thickly as passions did, and she would not let him see her fall apart like that. Instead, she set to unwinding her massive braids and curls. Then, she grabbed her brush from the bedside table, venting her anger and distress through the monotonous stroking of her thick dark curls, when her father knocked gently on the door. "Calina, may I come in?" Calina took a deep breath. He sounded stern but calm. Perhaps she could persuade him without a fight. She hated when they fought. Yet, fight or no fight, this was one matter she would not back down on. Yes, father. Setting the brush down, she looked up at the door, ready. Her father stepped in and shut the door behind him. For a moment, they just stared at each other. His eyes were unreadable, and Calina kept her gaze as equally calm as she could, though it was a struggle. Finally, the king said, I am very disappointed in you, Calina. Kalina's gaze darted to the floor. She hated those words pouring from those lips. Yet, reminding herself she must stand her ground, she raised her chin and said, I am very disappointed in you as well, father. The king flinched and then stared, taken aback. Quickly recovering, he said, You're disappointed. Why should you be disappointed? Certainly, I wasn't the one who behaved like an uneducated, selfish, hateful brat today. Calina felt her cheeks flush. Impatience flashed in her father's eyes, yet she could not help but feel inclined to further push him. There were many things she did for his sake because they were expected, or proper, but this was the rest of her life at stake. In marrying, she was supposed to be moving away from him, not being stuck under his control by daily hating a marriage she did not want. And certainly I wasn't the one who betrothed my daughter to some old prune. Old prune, snapped the king, voice rising. Lopez is a very dear, very old friend of mine. Yes, he certainly is very old. Calina, how dare you insult one of your elders in such a way? How can you be so disrespectful? I thought you'd be happy about meeting your husband. Yes, he's supposed to be my husband, not my elder, Calina cut in, her temper rising with her father's. Her eyes flashed warning, and she gripped the edge of the bed hard. And what's with this mirror? She motioned toward it. It was a generous gift. He said each word slowly and with purpose, clearly trying not to shout, but his voice was a bit sterner and louder. Their tempers rumbled like two volcanoes holding on to see who would burst first. It's huge, she persisted, not able to hold back, and not caring anymore. It's the weirdest engagement gift I've ever heard of, and it was embarrassing. You were an embarrassment. The king's reserve failed, temper flaring to its full fury. Calina stared at her father with just as much hurt and anger. I was an embarrassment. I was an embarrassment? You embarrassed me. I embarrassed you, he echoed loudly, aghast, his face a deep crimson. Yes, I expected a young prince, someone my age, just like we always talked about, just like you always promised, someone with whom I could have something in common with. Lopez is a good man, and how do you know you don't have anything in common with him? You didn't even give him a chance. I'm not marrying him, she cried. You'll marry him if I say to. I'm your father, and I know what's best for you. You will marry him. Calina stared at her father. No more words came to her. Never did he yell at her like this. Never did such anger and hurt swell in his gaze. The king's eyes narrowed, as if thinking the same thing, as if it pained him to see his daughter so unhappy. Yet he said, with all the quiet stubbornness of a king, We will talk more in the morning when you are ready. Good night, Calina. Without another word, he turned and left. Calina slammed the door behind him, locking it. Then she threw herself down on the bed and let the tears come. She cried and cried. It felt like hours before the tears stopped. How could her father be so selfish? Didn't he care about her at all? Looking up at the mirror, a new wave of both tears and rage overcame her, and she muffled her screams with her pillow. Then she jumped up off the bed, snatched up her candelabrum, raised it up, prepared to throw it at the mirror, to shatter the whole horrible thing into a million pieces. Freezing in place, she stared. Shapes and colors swirled on the glass's surface. She gasped as people appeared right there inside the mirror. Couples waltzing in an elaborate ballroom. It was like watching a beautiful silent play. Calina gradually lowered her arm and set the candelabrum back on the table, all the while staring with fascination and incredulity. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she just watched them. The bright colors of their dresses swirled past like prisms, and such happiness shone on each of their faces. Kalina's mouth dropped open as she spotted, in the background, an image of her very own self. The Calina in the mirror stood at the foot of a wide staircase spiraling down into the ballroom, watching the couples carefully as if searching for and expecting someone. The most elegant white dress flowed over her petite frame. Both high bodice and long skirt were littered with diamonds shining more brilliantly than anything Calina had ever seen. They glittered like 1,000 suns, as did the diamonds adorning her hair. The sleeves stretched long, nearly trailing the floor, made of an airy gauze material that also sparkled. Suddenly, someone came up to the Calina in the mirror, and the mouth of the real Calina dropped open just a little more. He was a prince of the Spanino Isles, to be sure. The golden butterfly crest, La Mariposa Dorada, embroidered on his dark green vest, revealed his status. He wore a white blouse beneath his vest and loose dark green pants. Like all at the ball, his feet were bare. With a smile, the Calina in the mirror took his hand, and they too joined the waltzing couples. Calina sat mesmerized as she watched her mirror self waltzing with the prince. He was so tall, so handsome, with dark hair, dark sparkling eyes, and richly tanned caramel skin. And, most of all, his eyes saw only her the entire time they waltzed. All too soon, it was gone. Gradually, the dancers faded until the mirror was once more a blank surface. Calina sighed deeply. How beautiful a scene! And yet, how sad. A new anger bubbled within her toward Lopez. Why would Lopez give her something that showed such things? Did he wish to break her heart even further? To cause her more pain by showing her visions of some beautiful future that could never happen? Settling beneath her covers, she glanced at the clock. It was midnight. Yes, perhaps it was cruel of Lopez. Yet, all the same, she could not help but think that she would like very much to see the prince again, and that she'd be waiting for him tomorrow night, come midnight. And that is the end of today's selection for the crystal rings. Already a lot of questions to be answered. So, first of all, what's going on with this betrothal? Why did Calina's father betroth her to someone who's twice her age when he always promised not to? What's going on with this mirror? What's with this gift that Lopez gave her of this magic mirror that shows her a vision of herself waltzing with this younger, handsome prince? Is he doing it to be mean? He doesn't seem like a mean guy. Does he even know that there are magic visions in the mirror? And if so, again, why? What is the purpose of this? Does it show her the future? And yet, it couldn't show her the future, right? Because she's supposed to marry Lopez. So, it's a whole mystery right now. To figure out the mystery for yourself, you can read The Crystal Rings. It's available as a paperback or as an ebook on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. It's also available as an ebook on some other websites, but I'll leave the Amazon and Barnes & Noble links down below in the description. Meanwhile, like this video or don't like it, and leave some comments below on how you enjoyed this reading, on some theories of what you think might happen next. If you had read the book, let me know how you liked it or didn't like it, but please give a warning if you're going to include spoilers for those who haven't read it yet. And yeah, invite all your book-loving friends to my channel so that they can enjoy listening to new books as well, particularly if they're into a fantasy and young adult fantasy. We will be reading some other things, but that will be one of the main focuses. On that note, happy reading, may you be inspired, and I will see you in my next video.